Alright, let's flash this video into existence. Sort of. It's already there. Whatever. There we go. Yeah, that's my intro. That's my intro for this. And all I want to do right now is talk about the C64 Mini. Yeah, see it says right there. Alright, the lighting in here sucks, but that's C64 Mini. Yeah. Unless you're reading this backwards. Sometimes my setup here broadcasts backwards, and I didn't plug it in, so it's going to be using up power. And this is what a C64 Mini looks like without anything plugged into it, except for this little USB drive that I left plugged into it, because why not? I wasn't going to drag the cables with me when I took it away from the television, but, you know, it's more effort to leave that in than take it out. But the C64 Mini, what's my thoughts on it? Why am I going to ramble on about it? Well, one of the things is apparently, I'm glad I got this. This is pretty cool. But one of the things about it is apparently they're coming out with a full-sized version, so it'll be twice as big, and it'll have a functioning keyboard. Because this one here, it looks like a keyboard, and it doesn't do anything. The keys don't do anything. Now, the reason for that, supposedly the reason why it doesn't have a functioning keyboard, but it has a software in it that functions as a keyboard, inconveniently, not nearly as convenient as being able to just press a button on this thing, is because this was gonna be a small little mini console based on the Commodore 64, and because the buttons were smaller, they figured they wouldn't be very useful. But if you've ever used a cell phone, like the device that's recording this right now or broadcasting this right now onto YouTube, you've probably, did some texting on a touch screen, and this is bigger than, the cell phone screens that you do that on, so I don't know why they didn't think, well, people are used to typing on an even smaller little device, and this is actually tactile if we made the buttons actually work, so that would be even easier to work with than a silly little touch screen. So, yeah, as far as I'm concerned, they should have made the keyboard on this thing operational. Just should have. Just should have. Each one of these little buttons should have been a button. But there's going to be a large version of this coming out, full-sized version, and that's really interesting. I'm still glad I got the small one, but I kind of want to get the full-sized one, and that's great. Comes preloaded with a bunch of games. The only two of them that mattered to me was Jumpman and Jumpman 2, which are really awesome games. I love those on the old Commodore 64 back in the 1980s. And I always wanted a Commodore 64. Now I have one. Used to have them in my elementary school. And, got a new match. Okay, whatever. But now's not the time for me to respond to that. In fact, I probably shouldn't ramble on too long about this. Shouldn't be too slow to get the point. Not only because that's tedious, but I don't think there's a lot of... this thing's not plugged in, so it's not charging the battery as it records, so... I don't know how long I have. I could disappear at any time. So anyway, what's my thoughts on it? It plays the games pretty good. I've seen some people where they've managed to calculate in time the fact that this has more delay than you'd expect. But it's not really a noticeable issue. I haven't had any trouble with delay. It comes with a joystick controller, which I left over that way and around there, and, which I'm not going to run off camera just to get. But it's an old style joystick. It's kind of like an Atari 2600 joystick if you're not familiar with the more common Commodore 64 joysticks. They were compatible. This thing is updated to use USB instead of that old, I think they call it the DE9 pin connection, whatever, was used by Atari 2600, used by Commodore, used by Sega Genesis, used by Sega Master System, used by Sega SG-1000, used by Atari 7800, but oddly enough, in between the Atari 2600 and Atari 7800, it was not used by the Atari 5200. It was used by the Commodore, or not Commodore, this is the Commodore 64. Yeah, it was used by the Commodore 64. It was used by the ColecoVision, and the Panasonic 3DO kind of used it, but never plug a controller into your 3DO that's not designed for the 3DO. There could be electrical issues and damage. Yeah, The 3DO. I like when video game systems use that universal controller port, and then you can plug like older and newer controllers into different devices. But the 3DO never should have done that. I've never had that problem because I've knew not to do that ahead of time. But yeah, the 3DO is known for destructive. I think damage both to the 3DO and the controller if you try that because it uses weird voltage and whatever. But anyway, no, this is great. There's I think it's 64 games on it. I didn't count them, and the package is in the other room. I think it says 64 on it. Not sure, but perfect number for the Commodore 64. And you know they're worth taking a look at out of curiosity. They're not amazing. Really, the two games on this that have me won over is Jumpman and Jumpman 2. I loved those games back in the day, and they're still fun. There's a few other games on there that are actually kind of cool. But for me, it's all about Jumpman and Jumpman 2. And my back is itching. Jumpman 2 is basically the same as another game that I have called Jumpman Jr., which I have on the almost in Commodore 64, which I also have on the ColecoVision in addition to being preloaded in the Commodore 64 Mini. And I also have it on a different Commodore 64 Mini, which is just basically the joystick. But for these things, the joystick sucks, okay? It's a joystick from the era. It's not bad when you consider what a joystick is. It's supposed to represent, you know, the time period. So the joystick that comes with this is exactly that. A joystick from the time period. And it sucks. It sucks. You want something with a D-pad. So you can plug a USB controller into this. It will work with other USB controllers. You're going to want to plug a USB hub into this. In fact, that's actually what I plugged into this was a USB hub. I'm just going to make sure the cats aren't doing anything destructive. No, the cats look fine. And you can plug multiple USB devices. Unfortunately, it only has the 2 USB ports, but whatever. So I have a USB version of a Sega Saturn controller, which works great with this. But some games, I noticed, I thought I had it working perfectly with Jumpman, the first Jumpman, and I know I can definitely get that controller to work with Jumpman 2. And what are the cats doing? I made a noise, but no distraction, didn't do anything wrong. Yeah, distracted by cats that might be causing problems. Earlier, one of the cats almost got under my foot while I was walking, and in addition to almost getting stepped on, she was right next to an electric heater, and there was a burning smell. I don't know what was burning, but it smelled like burnt hair, possibly burnt cat hair. Just saying that I have no idea. These cats could destroy the whole house. I don't know. So anyway, the USB controller is what you want for this thing. And while I said there's only 2 games on it that really interest me a lot, as I already said, a USB device plugged into this thing. This thing, if properly updated, can read multiple games off of a USB drive. You can load it full of all the games you want. Earliest models, you'd have to set up a special folder. It could only have 1 game in it, and it would play the games that way. The only problem is, as far as I know, this is going to have problems with multi-disc games, and some games just glitch out. And too many cats, too many problems. Anyway, so if the game doesn't glitch out, there's also the issue that most games use the controller plugged into the controller 2 port, and this is kind of set up to emulate that way. But you might have some trouble if it's a game not designed to do that. Like, there's all sorts of little glitches. And actually, in fact, the last time I had tried Jumpman 1, I couldn't get it to work with my USB Sega Saturn style controller, despite the fact I was getting Jumpman 2 to work with that controller. But I know I had got it to work before. It might have been the different positions it was plugged in, because maybe it wasn't plugged into this, it was plugged into the USB hub instead. I'm not sure. And I know that, well, Ghostbusters for the Commodore 64, obviously it would have to be for the Commodore 64, works with this, loaded off the USB drive. It only worked with the controller that came with this and didn't want to work at all with the other USB controller I tried plugging into this, which is odd. And I've had a lot of games, like, I don't know if it's the fault of the file that I tried to use, but I tried to play the real Ghostbusters, which is a kind of a cool old arcade game, which was a Commodore 64 version of, and it kind of glitches out. It plays, but you never actually get to the gameplay part of the game because it just glitches out. Just to mention an entirely different Ghostbusters game, so not perfect, but you can play an awful lot of games on this. I was playing Frantic Freddy on this, which was pretty cool. I mean, some people will be satisfied emulating this stuff. Last time I tried to set up an emulator on one of my computers, it wouldn't work with my newer computers and my older computer. For some reason, it wasn't working with the sound, and I'm not a big fan of emulators, and I don't know how many times I've downloaded one that glitches out. And I'm not sure if MU Paradise, if they still have emulators there or not. I could try to download a better Commodore 64 emulator, but... Oh, another little notification on this. Oh, bullshit poll. Progressives prefer... I can't... it disappeared before I could read it. But there's a new video by Jimmy Dore, so you should check that out, but feel free to keep watching this. And I don't know if anybody's watching live or not. I don't really care. It's easier for me to do this live than to store the file on my own devices, and it's easier if I just download it later to have my backup copy of it. But anyway, no, this device is actually pretty cool. I mentioned playing the Ghostbusters game on it, which is a game I really like. It's kind of controversial. Sometimes I'll see in magazines where people talk about it like it's great. I'll see videos where people talk about it like it's great, and other people will talk about it like it's like this horrible, crappy game. But well, the Nintendo Entertainment System version of Ghostbusters was pretty screwed up. I mean, the game becomes unplayable at a certain point if you don't have a turbo controller. I mean, it's technically playable, but not effectively. It's not a good game if you don't have a turbo controller. And even then, it's glitchy and awkward, and you kind of wonder what they were thinking when they made their design choices with the game in a lot of places. But that Ghostbusters game, I liked it on the Atari 2600, love it on the Commodore 64, and the Sega Master System version of the game is also really great. And Frantic Freddy, I mentioned Frantic Freddy. I love the music in that, and my emulator that I had been using last just didn't work with the sound on my computer for some reason. And Frantic Freddy had awesome music, but that was always a game I really liked. There's more than one version of Frantic Freddy out there, like different games with that name. And the version I'm thinking of is the version with the guy who's got like a little white cap, and I think it's red overalls, and he's running around to music that is kind of... You can kind of tell that copyright issues were different back then. There's a little introduction scene where he's being chased by a big green monster, and or an interlude. And when that plays, it's the rhythm of that song "Don't Let Me Down" by, I don't remember the name of the band. On the title screen, I'm pretty sure it's playing out a crazy little thing called "Love." There's a pretty kick-ass version of some old Beethoven music in there somewhere, which it sounds really dark and kick-ass. But a lot of old classical music, if played with electronic and/or heavy metal and/or rock instruments, heavy metal rap version of classical music can actually be pretty kick-ass. I mean, hey, they did what they could with at the time, you know. They predated the electric guitar. But there's actually pretty cool music in the Frantic Freddy game, so I was glad to be able to play that on this device here. But yeah, that's basically what's really cool about this, is the ability to play all those Commodore 64 games. There's people out there who have been updating and altering the games. So there's, I think what's called C64 Freeze was the name of the website, I think, that was kind of dedicated to that. And I haven't really downloaded anything really from them. I downloaded one thing that I didn't really try. I find that an interesting place, though, because there's potential to be constantly updating things and make it easier to play. I recently tried the Batman Commodore 64 game, which was based on the old movie from 1989, which is not a bad game. The weakness to Commodore 64 games in general is um, the controllers usually just use one button. Some of those old joysticks had multiple buttons, but really there was only one action button. Sometimes the two different buttons would do the same function, but it was, think of it as the computer came out in 1982. It's been referred to as the Model T of computers, because the Ford Model T was the car that was affordable and drivable by the average person. The first car to really do that was far from the first car. Daimler and Benz, before they merged, is it pronounced Daimler or Daimler? The people who eventually became known for Mercedes-Benz. Those were actually originally two separate car companies, and both of them, I think, were the two oldest production car companies in the planet's history. So cars had been around, since the 1800s. There was an amphibious car made in the early 1800s as part of the American car history, as cars made in the United States, which is a nation in one of the American continents. It's in North America as opposed to being in South America, but they refer to them as American cars, even though they tend to focus on one specific nation in a continent that's named, one of two continents that are named America. So it's always an odd thing, but it's just the way it is. American car history. There's, what did they call it? Something Owens or something like that. Amphibious car, which was basically like a steamship that could roll up on the land, which he only made one of. But I remember reading that as part of like car history production. Well, it wasn't mass produced. They made like one of it. But if you read the standard catalog of American cars, it's in there. And I'm getting kind of off topic, but this thing was considered to be the Model T of home computers, because it was a computer just about anybody could get. I mean, I couldn't afford one. I ended up settling on a Nintendo Entertainment System to play video games, but I really wanted one of these back in the day. They came out in 1982. So when you think of video game technology, which a lot of people are that's why people are getting this thing, mostly. I mean, somebody might get it to play around with Commodore 64 Basic, which you can do on this, but you're getting this for the video games. I mean, seriously. This was like the first home computer that was really accessible, really usable. And we're talking about the era. I mean, like 1977 would have been the Atari 2600. 1982, you had like the ColecoVision. Like most game systems had like one action button, maybe two if you're lucky. So like a lot of games, you need to press something on the keyboard every now and then. So I mentioned earlier playing the Batman game based on the 1989 movie. And it's like one action button. You press the action button and up, and he shoots his grappling hook. You can shoot it up on an angle, but you just press the action button when you're walking, and he throws something. So he doesn't even have a jump maneuver. At least none that I know of. Maybe there's something I could have pressed on the keyboard that might have made the difference. One thing that would have been cool, like I had to plug in a little a USB keyboard into this thing, and it's kind of like it's like one of those flexible ones that you can wrap up and put it in a cylinder and store it away. And you need that to play the Ghostbusters game, because when the ghosts try to form Stay Puft, if they do that earlier, if you have a premature Stay Puft Marshmallow Man manifestation, you have to press the button to activate the ghost bait to draw the ghosts away from the place where they're going to manifest the Stay Puft, so that they don't do that. So you don't end up sued for massive amounts of damage to the city. And, if you could press it on this thing here, if you could just, press this, that would be easier than plugging in a USB keyboard. But, this keyboard doesn't work. And, as I mentioned, the Ghostbusters game actually works pretty good with this. The first time, actually, a lot of the problems I've been having might have something to do with the games themselves. Because although I have it on floppy drive, you cannot plug a floppy drive with this. I had collected the Ghostbusters game on floppy drive just to collect Ghostbuster stuff. I have the floppy disk of Ghostbusters. You're plugging a floppy drive into this, No, you're not. You're not gonna. Especially, you can get USB floppy drives. I have no idea if they'll work with this at all. But the old Commodore 64 floppy drives, you'd have to modify something to even get that to work. And I got a new match again. Oh, cool. Hmm. I'm popular! Yay! Anyway, so this yeah stuff keeps coming up on the screen here, because yeah. Anyway, because I'm recording this on a cell phone. Yeah. Actually, I'm broadcasting this from a cell phone. So anyway, I'm basically awkwardly rambling about this damn thing, but I like it. I really like this. I really like those old Commodore 64 computers. I was never really hugely into computer gaming, but the Commodore 64 and the Commodore Amiga, which the Amiga started as a different line of computers but were acquired by Commodore, are great. So, I mean, if this is something anybody out there finds interesting, USB thumb drive, I recommend Jumpman 1 and Jumpman 2 on this. And I recommend trying all the games on it just to take a look at them, but the games on this are not the reason to get this. The reason is you can plug your USB device in it. You might have to update it. You can download updates for this thing, which is good. You're going to want those updates because right out of the box, it doesn't have the USB loader on it. You update it, then it'll have a little icon that when it detects a USB device plugged into it. So you can just move the little indicator down onto that. Go into your USB drive, read everything that's on the USB drive, and select what you want. That's what you want to do. You want to have that ability, and then thousands of games are available to you, and you'll have to figure out which ones are interesting. Now, this is the North American model, made for the North American market. I tried to play Star Control on this. Yeah, Star Control is an awesome game on the Sega Genesis. Awesome game on the Amiga computer system. An awesome sequel in the Panasonic 3DO. When I tried to play it on this, I mean, I know the Commodore 64 version's pretty downscaled, but I'd still like to try it. When I tried to play it on this, and the message comes up that the game is designed to work on PAL hardware only. Basically, it's telling me it's made to be played in Europe. Contact your dealer. So this thing knows that it's North American and doesn't want to play PAL, which kind of sucks. I even went and changed the options so that the screen was to set the screen to be PAL, and then I went back into the game and nope, wouldn't play the game. Said it needs PAL hardware. So that was one limitation. It didn't want to play that one game that I guess was designed to just work in Europe. Oh well. And Star Control was a pretty awesome game. Kind of curious to see how it plays on some, an actual Commodore 64, or even if it's a Commodore 64 mini clone console. So I recommend these things to anybody that's remotely interested in those old games. For me, the ability to play that old Ghostbusters game was absolutely awesome. What you're going to want a USB drive. You just are. You want more games than what this comes with. Although it's cool that there are games preloaded in it, this makes the difference. This takes a pretty cool device into being an excellent device. Just an absolute awesome little device that you absolutely want. You're going to want a USB hub so you can plug more devices in the USB port as well. Get the HDMI port there and your USB power there. So it's another device that you don't just plug it straight into the electrical outlet. You gotta plug it into a USB port somewhere and get an old cell phone charger that, like an iPhone charger or whatever that plugs into the electrical outlet, but then you can plug a USB cable into it. One of those will do the job. But yeah, this is a great device. Mentioning its shortcomings, like I said, you're going to want a USB controller with a directional pad, and some games that will not work with. The Ghostbusters game I tried this with, I had to use the joystick. For some reason, I couldn't get I kept calling USB, but they're both USB. I couldn't get the the aftermarket non-Commodore 64 controller to work with it. But for the most part, yeah, the the Sega Saturn style USB controller worked with most of the games I tried it with. Um, I had a lot of trouble with certain games. I'm trying to think how many oddball games just didn't work. It looked like the Simpsons arcade game might have been going to load, but then it glitched out. I had trouble with that. I mentioned I had trouble with the real Ghostbusters arcade game. I don't remember if I got Ghostbusters 2 to play or not, but that was a pretty crummy game. Though the Commodore 64 version of that game was probably the best version of the crummiest Ghostbusters 2 game. The Nintendo Entertainment System got a pretty weak version of Ghostbusters 2, but the one that was on the Atari 2600 and the Commodore 64 and the Amiga computer systems was designed even dumber. It was just a bad idea what they did for that game. Now the Nintendo Entertainment System version of the game called New Ghostbusters 2, which was released in Japan and Europe, that's an awesome game. That's a great game. It's very similar to the Game Boy version of Ghostbusters 2. That's a great game. But so I don't feel like I'm missing a whole lot by not getting Ghostbusters 2 to play on this. But maybe I did. I don't even remember. It's on the USB drive. But I know I got Ghostbusters 1 to work. But it wasn't the first version of Ghostbusters 1 that I downloaded that worked either. The first one I downloaded, well, one of the ones that I had just didn't work. It came up with a title screen saying that was Activision's Ghostbusters, which is, I don't normally see that on the Ghostbusters game. Then it didn't do anything. Then there was another version I had downloaded that was the Ghostbusters game and worked, but it wasn't in English, and I wanted to play it in English. And then another version I had was English. So, dealing with finding the old games for this, was an issue. But if you think you can access these old games somehow, this is a great way to play it. You can plug it into your television. You're not screwing around with emulators on your computer. I'm not a big fan of emulation on personal computers. A few games I played emulated. I went through the entire Phantasy Star 1 emulated before I got the cartridge. I wanted the cartridge, had trouble finding it. Loved Phantasy Star 4, loved Phantasy Star 2. I emulated Phantasy Star 1 on the computer before I actually got the cartridge. Then I got the cartridge the next year after I'd played through the entire thing emulated. But for the most part, when I sit down and play an emulated game, I don't know what it is. I can tell the difference, and then I just start losing interest fast. And this I really like this. Great little emulation box, great little console. Plug it into your television. Like I said, you're going to want a bunch of stuff to plug in this. You're definitely going to want a USB keyboard. The in-software keyboard is better than nothing. It's kind of cool to have it, but you're going to want to plug a USB keyboard into it. I've said that a bunch of times. You're going to want a contemporary joystick to plug into this, as well as the one that comes with it. Or I should say a control pad, preferably. But other than that, this is a great little device, a little mini console version of the what some people refer to as the Model T of home computers. And my thoughts, what I would really like to see them do with this device when they make a large version of it, I'm hoping that this is successful enough that they're going to make a full-sized version of it. So I'm hoping that the company that makes these continues. And what I really want to see, I want to see a version of this that's not Commodore 64, but Amiga computer. Now that would be awesome if it was a Commodore Amiga. But I'm going to end this, and yeah, holy crap, it's almost been a half hour. And I finally got to the part where I said, hey, these are great. They need to make an Amiga version of this. And if they get the right to Commodore, Commodore owned Amiga, so it might not be that hard for them to do that.